Way to Olympus. My life story. Author this book, Bohdan Tihan. Kharkiv City, Ukraine. 2024 years. Autumn season works.
Section 0 Introduction Forward. First steps. Birth was the beginning of everything. On 4 February 2000, a boy was born who was destined to experience more than he could have ever imagined. The room was warm, soft, with windows looking out into the peaceful blue sky. His first memories were hidden in the dark corners of his childhood imagination, where everything was new, mysterious and dangerous at the same time. First attempts to interact with the world. When he was 2 years old, he began to explore this world with unwavering curiosity. One day, when he approached an electrical outlet, he could not resist the urge to stick his bare electric wires into it. The result was unexpected. He almost died when he felt the power of the electric current. That was the first time he was saved by his mother's hand. The shadows of fear. His childhood was marked by danger. The kitchen where the boy first drank a bottle of iodine was not just an ordinary kitchen, but the place where he had his first desperate experience of drinking a bottle of potion. The iodine he drank almost took his life, because his body was not yet ready for such encounters with a world full of unpredictable threats. A year later, he went to the river to rest with his older siblings. The boy did not yet know how to swim. He approached the edge of the bridge, stumbled and fell into the water, drowning. He fell to the very bottom of the pond. He looks up and sees the sun's rays penetrating the water. Another minute and he would have disappeared, but the circumstances allowed him to survive. School and self-discovery. At the age of 6, the boy started school. This moment became important not only because of the entry into educational life, but also because of the encounter with what he had previously avoided: social rules, requirements, invisible walls that he tried to overcome. But even at school, where there were many people, the boy felt an inner emptiness. He was looking for his place, and one day he found it near the cemetery. It became his place of reflection, his place of solitude. It was a place where he could stop and think about his place in the world, where there were no people, no schoolwork, only silence and solitude. Between life and death, the search for himself continues. And although the cemetery has become part of his world, he does not stop. Every year it becomes more and more difficult for him to determine where real life begins and where death ends. Sometimes shadows appear in his dreams and nightmares, reminding him of invisible boundaries. They seem to say, "You are not ready yet." And the boy, in search of answers, finds himself at a crossroads. Should he go on, or maybe it's enough to stop? The search for real freedom. As the boy grows older, he begins to search for his place in the world. Nature becomes close to him, and the forest becomes a symbol of his search. The feeling of freedom that the trees and air give him makes this forest a place where he can find himself. He wanders around looking for answers to questions that have long been stuck in his mind. However, the path to self-discovery is not easy. In a remote village, he meets people whose simplicity and belief in natural existence make him question whether he is really on the right path. The city, with its hustle and bustle, makes him feel like a stranger again, as every day seems to be just a series of actions with no deeper meaning behind them. The shadow of time passing. Upon returning home, the protagonist begins to feel the shadow of the past hanging over him. His father's house becomes for him not only the place where he grew up, but also the place that haunts him. All the memories, all the conflicts, all the emotions that have accumulated over the years begin to be reflected in his inner world. The basement of the house, a dark, cold place, becomes a symbol of his inner fears and anxiety. It is a place where he hides from his demons and tries to avoid answering painful questions. His loneliness deepens when he begins to feel that the city around him is just a reflection of the emptiness inside him. All these strange people, whose fuss means nothing, become even more alienating to him. Finding the search for a way out of the darkness leads the hero to sports and physical activity. Again and again, he finds himself on the sports field, where he can try to forget about the pain and physically get it out of his system. In the struggle with his own body, he finds strength and recovers. In a cave he finds during one of his walks, he meets himself. Here, amidst the stones and darkness, he realizes that his strength is not embodied in his muscles or in his victories. His strength lies in his ability to maintain his inner balance despite all the difficulties. This cave becomes the place of his enlightenment. Now he knows that everything he has been looking for is within him. Steps to reconciliation. The path to reconciliation with oneself cannot be straightforward. The protagonist returns to the city, where he encounters not only problems but also people with whom he is connected. They seem like strangers, but it is these relationships that make him think about the importance of interacting with others. In the forest, where he finds comfort and safety again, the hero realizes that there is only one way to heal, to come to terms with the past and what has become part of his life. The city no longer seems so scary, and relationships with other people do not cause such internal resistance. He goes to the island, a symbol of isolation and renewal. Here, in the middle of the boundless ocean, he finally realizes that he is able not only to break the vicious circle of suffering, but also to find peace within himself. Section 1. Chronology of events, 0-24 years, location. Starobilsk, Luhansk region, Ukraine. Date 4 February 2000. Time of birth 4:20 am, winter. The city of Starobilsk, located in eastern Ukraine, became the place where this world met a new soul. On 4 February 2000, in the cold February winter, when the moon was about to change its phase, a boy named Buddy was born. Born under the constellation Aquarius, he was born at a time when the stars seemed to be closer to the earth and the clouds, gliding quietly across the sky, covered the entire city with an unusual light. It was the first day of his life, a day that had no traces and was a clean slate. There was no mention of anything that might have preceded his birth. Yet everyone who was around could hear how strangely quiet it was that night. The frost that was compressing everything around seemed somehow distant and even frozen in time. His mother, who was in the family circle, looked at the first hours of his new life with a different, tender gaze. It was her new world, the world in which she was becoming a mother. 1 year. The first years of his childhood were quiet, but from the very beginning of this journey, the boy's characteristic traits began to emerge. He was inquisitive, prone to exploration, even when it was dangerous. Already at the age of 2, he found his first electric wire and reached out without fear to plug the bare wire into a socket. It was the first moment when his life almost ended at the very beginning. A short circuit could have led to a disaster, but someone from the family saw it in time and managed to pull his hand away from the electric current. These moments, when children's curiosity can lead to danger, became part of his early memories. 3 year. Another dangerous stage in his childhood occurred when he accidentally drank a bottle of iodine, which led to a quick intervention by doctors. Like the previous one, he remembers this moment not only for the physical pain, but also for a certain sense of security and care from his family. The doctors provided him with the necessary treatment, but this moment remained a shadow for him. Images that he could not explain in words, but which caused anxiety and fear, remained vivid in his memory. 4 years old. The next test for him was water. Walking near the river, he almost drowned. The river was fast and cold, and the reservoir was deep. The current could have pulled the little child down to the very bottom. However, at the last moment he was pulled out. This incident made an indelible impression on him. The feeling that life could change in an instant. Later, he often felt that water was for him both a beautiful and dangerous element, a force of nature. 5 years of his life. Another encounter with danger occurred when his family went on vacation to the coast. No one expected that the little boy, who did not know how to swim, would find himself in a life-threatening situation again. It happened on the beach, where a strong wind was making big waves. The boy, enthusiastic about playing in the water, went into the deep end and began to drown. This time, he was just lucky to escape the tragedy, thanks to his luck. However, it left another deep wound in his memory, awakening an inner fear of water that will stay with him for the rest of his life. And he still doesn't know what will happen when he turns 21 in the summer, which is also symbolically connected to water. The same year. The fire. One of the most unforgettable moments of his childhood was a fire that occurred when he was only 5 years old. The whole family lived in a house next to a large hangar where they stored hay for animals. That day, the boy was cold and decided to warm himself. He found a handful of hay and started a fire with matches right on the barn grate, not thinking about the consequences. At first, everything went well. The fire provided warmth, and the boy felt safe. However, his carelessness led to a dangerous situation. The hay started to burn. The fire spread rapidly, and soon he saw the flames slowly engulfing the hangar. He was panicked, but instead of leaving the scene of the fire, he ran home. His heart was pounding, but he felt strangely calm as he watched what was happening. He quickly shared his discovery with his aunt and then hid in the house, unable to bear the sight of the burning disaster. Before that, when he set it on fire, he ran and screamed, "Save yourself who can. The fire demons have come out." A few minutes later, he heard the sirens of approaching fire trucks. The fire had already become huge and fierce, and the boy hid in his room and watched through the window as the rescuers fought the flames. He was curious, but also scared to see the fire consume everything in its path, leaving only ash and smoke. The firefighters worked quickly and efficiently, and the fire was finally extinguished. But for the little boy, it was another important encounter with the consequences of his own curiosity and lack of fear of the forces of nature. This event left a deep mark on his memory. He was never the same again. From that moment on, he realized that sometimes a small idea that seems safe at first glance can lead to a danger that is difficult to stop. And although it was just one of many adventures, it showed him how unpredictable the world around him can be. 6 years old. At the age of 6, he started school. It was an important step in his life, the first step into a big learning, first acquaintances, first rules and requirements. School became a place where he first felt that the world could be more complex and controlled than he had previously thought. Teachers and classmates became part of his everyday world, and responsibilities became a reality that he tried to understand. 7 years old. From the age of 7, he began to look for his own place, even if it meant running away to the nearest cemetery. Why the cemetery? But here he began to feel peace. The gloomy and silent tombstones became a symbol that life goes on its way, and that everything, even death, is part of nature. For him, the cemetery was like a space for reflection, a place where he felt free. He began to look at death not from the point of view of fear, but as a part of a bigger picture where everyone has their place. Year 8. Striving for the great and the unknown at the age of 8, his interest in science and physics began to express itself more clearly. His imagination knew no bounds, and his fantasy had room for endless dreams and experiments. He began to actively look for ways to realize his scientific dreams, following the footsteps of those great scientists whose names have left a mark on history. In particular, he could not stop his admiration for Nikola Tesla, a brilliant inventor whose work on electric generators and coils incredibly amazed his mind. He gathered the materials he could find and began to create his own generators. He made coils, hoping that he could recreate lightning, which he thought would be proof of his scientific genius. Although nothing worked out as he had planned, each new experiment gave him even more insight into physics and the nature of electricity. It was not just a childish curiosity, but a real desire to touch something great and extraordinary, to feel how the laws he could only read in books work. But physics was not his only passion. His irresistible thirst for action was also manifested in physical exercises. He started doing acrobatics, performing flips from a height. To make the fall less painful, he carefully prepared the place, he plowed the ground and made it softer. He wasn't afraid to take risks, because he felt that every new trick was a new step towards self-discovery. Later, he started jumping from rooftops, feeling the adrenaline rush and the pleasure of being able to conquer heights. But most of all, he was impressed by the acrobatics on the horizontal bar, especially the sun trick, when he spins, turning over in the air like an invisible stream of energy. In addition, the boy loved to climb trees. He often found time to climb the tallest tree that grew nearby. The branch below him would sway, and he would feel the wind in his hair, and his heart would be filled with an incredible sense of freedom. From the top of the tree, he could see the entire surrounding landscape, immersing himself in an unforgettable view that had always fascinated him. It was a moment when he felt like a part of something bigger, free, and seemingly even incomprehensible to others. High up in the tree, among the branches and leaves, he felt on top of the world. Those moments gave him an invaluable sense of peace, and although he was still a child, he already knew that he wanted to explore the world on his own terms, to experiment and discover new horizons. A look into the future. These early years formed the foundations of his personality. He experienced several dangerous situations that became life lessons for him. His childhood was full of both anxiety and moments that left deep marks on his mind. These stages shaped his attitude to the world and to his own nature, reflecting the complexity that was always present in his inner world. 10 years. The great spring river floods when he turned 10. Spring brought with it an incredible phenomenon, the great floods of the river, which left a deep mark on his memory. It was the time when the earth was just beginning to awaken, and the river, freed from the winter ice, was gaining strength again. The days were getting longer, but the cold water still held the remnants of the winter frost. In the mornings, the air was fresh, almost cool, with the smell of damp earth and blossoming grasses. The banks of the river, where recently one could see stones and grass, were now hidden under water. Large, muddy waves gently rose and fell, not allowing the day to begin without noise and continuous movement. The leaves that had just begun to appear on the trees now floated on the water, bearing the imprints of the sky and the morning clouds. The water was deep and cold, and although it was slowly returning to its banks, its power was still impressive. Only a few days ago, the water was much lower, but now it had gone beyond its usual borders, filling the steppes and meadows with water. Nature was waking up. In the morning, the sun was just peeking out from behind the horizon, painting the sky in delicate pink and golden colors. The soft earth, covered with early flowers, rustled underfoot, and the trees were filled with the singing of birds returning from warm lands. The air was thick with humidity, and every step seemed so easy, as if on the threshold of a new life. He stood on the shore and watched the water carry away everything, old branches, remnants of grass, and trees that had broken under the pressure. These floods were both scary and amazing at the same time. The water that flooded the banks was so powerful that it seemed as if the river itself could take everything in its path, even time, with it. But at the same time, there was something magical about it. It united everything around, giving harmony and peace in its great flow. Sitting on the edge of the shore, he felt nature freeze in silence. Every gust of wind carried the smell of damp earth and the echo of distant thunder, and he mentally let go of all his worries. Here, in the midst of this open space, among the spills and the smell of fresh air, everything seemed to be in place. And although the river carried enormous power, he found peace and great freedom in its splash. It was a time when the world around him seemed so pure and renewed, and his heart beat in unison with nature. Spring brought its spills, and with them a new sense of grandeur and the possibilities that were opening up before him. 11 years old. Moving to Idar Mikhailovka at the age of 11, when he started 5th grade, his life took on a new dimension. The family moved to another place, and new horizons opened up with the new home. They settled in the village of Idar Mikhailovka, where nature was both majestic and soothing, with all its colors, sounds, and smells. The picturesque Novoador hills stretched around the house, offering spectacular views of the surrounding nature. One of the most famous local attractions was the Sheep's Foreheads, amazing chalkstone formations that resembled large boulders carved by nature for some special purpose. This place became popular among tourists, but it was also surrounded by legends. According to legend, it was here, in one of the large boulders, that a cave was hidden. And the rumors that circulated among the locals told of a treasure hidden here in the 17th century by the Cossacks. The legend said that in times of war, when the land was filled with struggle and danger, the Cossacks hid their precious treasures in this cave: gold, silver, ancient artifacts with secret codes and maps that could reveal the places where other treasures were hidden. This place has become the object of numerous searches and fantasies. And the children themselves, like him, repeatedly tried to find these secrets, climbing on stones and looking for the entrance to the cave. On the other side were dense oak forests. They were incredibly mysterious, with the shadows of tall trees creating an atmosphere of calm and sometimes even magic. Every spring, the first flowers could be seen here. Snowdrops slowly making their way through the ground after winter, bright snowdrops that seemed to remind of a new beginning, and Corydalus intermedia, a beautiful flower that filled the forest glades with its purple inflorescences. Corydalus intermedia became an integral part of this spring picture, as if marking the arrival of warmth and new life. He often spent time in these forests, collecting flowers and admiring their tenderness. It was a period of discovery and acquaintance with nature, where every step was full of impressions and new knowledge about the world around him. On the other side of the house was a wide steppe, and here a river flowed calmly, quietly sliding between the grasses and stones. He often went fishing with his father. These were simple but unforgettable moments when they sat together on the river bank with a fishing rod in their hands, silently enjoying the silence and each other's company. Here, on the river, he felt a special connection with his father and nature, as well as a sense that every moment in life is valuable when you are in harmony with the world around you. These landscapes became a part of his inner world. The hills with their stone appearance, the forests that hid many secrets, the steppe and the river with its quiet splash. They inspired him, made every day special, and taught him to appreciate the beauty of the simple things around us. 12 years old. First long-distance trip to the Caucasus at the age of 12, he made his first big trip, which he remembered for the rest of his life. It was a trip to the city of Nalchik, in the Kabardino-Balkar Republic, to visit his great-grandmother, his maternal grandfather's mother. To a place where the mountains seem endless, and the peaks themselves disappear into the clouds, covering them with snow even as the summer sun roasts the earth below. It was a place that combined the majesty of nature with deep family roots that told of the people who lived here, who were proud of their land and kept it in their hearts, even when there were no longer those who could know the ancient ways. His impressions of this trip were incredible. He remembers how the car was approaching Nalchik, and with every kilometer along the road, the huge cliffs covered with forests became higher and more majestic, until finally he saw Mount Elbrus itself. It seemed so far away, but at the same time so close. Huge and mysterious, with its snowy peaks sparkling in the sun, it was not just a natural object, but a symbol of something eternal and unchanging. He dreamed of one day climbing to this peak, feeling all its strength and testing himself at the top. After they arrived in Nalchik, the real magic began. His great-grandmother, a warm and wise woman, greeted them as if they were family and revealed to him the whole history of her family, rich in traditions and legends. After these stories, the journey continued to the Narzan Springs, located somewhere south of the city. These were natural mineral waters that seemed to promise healing power, albeit with a special taste, orange, sour, but incredibly nourishing. The water had the same unusual shade as the nature around it, bright, lively and real, like an ancient world that combines the ancient forces of the earth and the heavens. The journey was even more interesting because we had to pass through metal ore deposits. Here, among the mountains, the earth told its own story. Here and there, gold and rusty rocks flashed, as if they held riches hidden from human eyes. Although it was impossible to see this treasure, a sense of magic and mystery filled my soul. The huge stones seemed to be witnesses of ancient epochs, when these mountains stood before the birth of time itself. And then they reached the hot springs, which were like amulets of this land. The warm, pulsating water flowing from the depths of the volcano gave a feeling of rebooting, as if the earth itself held an incomprehensible energy. It was a place where the hot water boiling from the heart of the volcano boiled right out of the faults of the earth's crust. In those moments when he dipped his hands into these springs, he felt the power of the volcano penetrate him, and it seemed that he was becoming part of this eternal energy. It was real magic, where water and earth, stone and wine merged into one invisible force. This whole region was full of silence and majesty, and although life here went on in its daily rhythm, the very spirit of these places seemed unchanged, as if they existed before us and will exist after. The city of Nalchik, Elbrus, the Narzan Springs and the hot waters of the volcanoes were moments that he will always keep in his memory as precious treasures. They taught him to love nature, to admire its power and to discover its invisible ways, where you can find everything you need for life. 13 years old. Between two worlds, this period was one of the darkest in his life. He was 13, and he already understood what fear was, but he didn't know what to do with it. His father was so drunk that it seemed he could do anything. Drunken aggression was hard to predict, and it always came suddenly, like a storm coming out of nowhere. That night, when his father threatened his mother once again, he managed to put himself between them for the first time, feeling his heart pounding and his hands beginning to tremble with fear. He didn't understand why he didn't have the strength to just run away or leave it at that. But something inside him said that he could not stand by while his mother was in danger. All those years ago, when he was still a child, he could not imagine that one day he would be the one who would try to protect her. It was the moment when he first felt a real responsibility for the lives of the people he loved. The father, who probably did not realize what he was doing at the time, went to extremes. In a fit of anger, he beat his father, his paternal grandfather, a man who could not defend himself at that moment because of his age and weakness. This psychosis in which his father was experiencing led to the fact that his grandfather, who was elderly, suffered a severe concussion. The very evening it all happened, the boy could only watch as his grandfather, who had just survived this horrific trauma, slowly began to lose consciousness from pain and fear. A lot changed that day. A year after that, a stroke paralyzed his grandfather, and 2 years later, a second stroke ended his life. His grandfather died, and it was like an irreparable fork in his life, when he realized that his father's violence could have terrible consequences for everyone. Even then, he felt that from that moment on, nothing would be the same. He was faced with a choice. Either to remain a silent observer of the destruction of their family, or to try to find the strength to change everything. His soul was torn between love for his father and disgust at his cruelty, between the desire to protect his mother and the fear of losing his family. These feelings stayed with him for many years. 14 years old. Loneliness in a crowd. 14 was his last year in the 9th grade, and it was a difficult time for him, like most of his teenage years. He was lonely among people he couldn't call friends and who couldn't seem to understand him. There was not a single soul in the classroom who really accepted him for who he was. He felt like an outsider, even among the peers he was supposed to spend every day with. School became for him not a place of communication, but a space where he hid in his own world. He was like a ghost among the others, like someone everyone sees but no one wants to notice. He had no friends, no one to whom he could turn for support or comfort. Children laughed at him, pushed him in the corridors, and sat in silence in the classroom, and no one paid attention to him. His existence was one that left no trace. He often walked around the school alone, trying to hide in the classrooms, feeling that he was not in this world, that he was not even here. Classes seemed to him just a formality, like a duty to be fulfilled, not a place for cognition or development. He couldn't find his place in the classroom, among his classmates, in an environment dominated by a cruel hierarchy in which he seemed to have neither chances nor support. Even when he left school, he still felt like an outsider. Like someone who stands on the edge of the crowd and observes life from a distance, unable to become a part of it. He saw others making friends, talking and laughing, while he stood on the sidelines, like an observer in his own world who had nothing to do with them. He had the feeling that every movement around him was someone else's, an unreal movement, where he was always left out. 15 years old. Embodiment and escape. 15 is the year he decided to leave his parents' house and return to his grandfather's house, to find a place where he could feel at least a little safe again. Living with his father had become unbearable for him. His nerves were torn from the constant conflicts, and his ties with his family were slipping away like sand through his fingers. Therefore, when he went to live at his grandfather's house, it was like an escape to peace and quiet. His grandfather's house, which stood near the cemetery, became his new place, his new refuge. Here he could find moments for himself. The space between life and death always left room for reflection, for exploring the world around us. The cemetery was not a place of fear, but a place where one could find peace and solitude. Here, among the shadows of the graves and the soft rustle of the leaves, he felt less like a stranger in this world. It was a place where he could think about life, death, and everything in between. That same year, he traveled with his grandmother and Uncle Andre to medical school to support them in their application. During this trip, he had conflicting feelings in his heart. On the one hand, he saw how his loved ones were trying to support him to move forward, and on the other hand, he felt like his own life was stuck in place, or doing things he shouldn't be doing. It was a difficult year when he started to have the first problems with concentration. It was hard to learn new material, to concentrate in class, to sit for long periods of time with books. It seems that his brain, which was already overloaded with internal experiences and constant changes, now refused to perform functions that had previously seemed simple. He began to feel that something had changed, but he could not understand why. This period was a transition for him between childhood and adolescence. Loss of stability, change of environment, search for a new place under the sun, all this became a part of his life, which was going through difficulties, but at the same time opened up new horizons for him. 16 years old. Searching for yourself and first attempts at self-expression. The age of 16 is a time when many young people begin to search for their identity, to define who they are and who they want to become. For him, this year was a stage of self-discovery, an intensive analysis of his own interests and experiences. It was the moment when he realized that creativity was his path, that he wanted to be part of the world of music and literature. Self-expression through music and poetry was the first important step for him on his way to becoming a future composer. He started writing poems, melodies, and experimenting with different musical and literary forms. It was a time when he was opening up new horizons for himself, trying to express what he hadn't been able to say in words or notes before. He felt that in music and words he could find something more than in the real world, and because of this he plunged into the loneliness of creativity. But the search for himself was not painless and pure. During this period, he also began experimenting with alcohol and dimedrol as a way to escape from reality, realizing that this path could allow him to see the world from a different perspective. These were attempts to find some kind of outlet, to close himself off from painful memories, disappointments, and constant internal struggles. He was not looking for ways to destroy himself, but trying to find his place in the world, trying to understand what life is and how to get along with it. This year was both a moment of searching and an attempt to escape the reality that made him feel like an outsider. But it was in music and literature that he found a source for reflection, for reflecting his own pain and experiences. He felt that he had embarked on the path of a composer, even if this path was covered in fog and uncertainty. The age of 16 was the time when he was not yet fully aware of where he was going, but he already intuitively felt that this path of creativity would be his salvation and the path to self-realization. 17 years old. First love and the warmest moments of youth. The age of 17 was the period when my heart truly opened to love for the first time. On his birthday, it was as if fate had decided to give him what he had been looking for so long, real, sincere feelings. It was that meeting that changed his world, filling it with a life that had never been there before. He met his love. To be with her, he did the most romantic things for her. Every day was filled with warmth and tenderness, which he gave her regardless of the difficulties of the world around them. They picked flowers together. He rode his bicycle through the mountains to another village 19 miles away from his native Idar Mikhailovka. Each way was hard, but he had a single goal in his heart, to be close to her. And these trips through the mountains, with the wind in his face and lights on the horizon, seemed to him the most valuable. They walked together, met sunrises and sunsets. It wasn't just a daily existence, it was a ritual, where each moment brought more joy than the last. They rode the same bicycle, riding through the night city, feeling only one thing, this momentary freedom. They laughed, holding hands, and caught the peace of the night together. Their moments while fishing were no less important. He never considered it just an ordinary activity. Every hour they spent together was valuable. It was a way to touch the world in which only their presence, only their feelings reigned. Fishing on quiet waters was their world, merging with nature, and every cast of the rod, every look in the eyes was like another small victory. These moments became the warmest memories of his youth. Love, romance, laughter and simplicity of days, it was a real freedom when time seemed to stop. And although this period did not last long, it left an imprint on his entire life, like a golden thread in the fabric of his youth. These moments of love became the most vivid and precious things he took away from those years. 18 years old. Preparing for the long haul. Turning 18 was a time when the world began to take on clearer shapes and a new goal was opening up for him. Feeling that his creative path was approaching, he began preparing to enter a college of art. This was an important step, because in order to become a composer, he needed to acquire fundamental knowledge of music, in particular, instrumental skills. He was ready to go through this stage, giving all his strength and energy to achieve his goal. However, it was not an easy road. The real path to music required not only technical skill but also support. One of the main people who helped him determine his direction was Sergei Petrovich Turnev, a composer and fellow countryman who not only served as a mentor but also played an important role in shaping his professional plans. From the first day he learned about his desire to become a composer, Sergei Petrovich supported him and gave him advice on how to apply. First, go to college to study piano, and then to a higher education institution, he advised. It was a concrete plan that opened the door to deeper knowledge and opportunities for him. Sergei Petrovich believed that instrumental skills would help him understand music on a deeper level, and then, through theoretical disciplines, achieve greater skill as a composer. This year was full of classes and preparations for admission. He attended the conservatory every day, improving his piano skills, studying music theory, listening, playing and learning the works of great composers. But it was also a time of inner search and self-discovery. He was confident in his path, even though he didn't have all the answers yet, and this only confirmed his desire to move forward. Going to college was more than just an academic goal for him. It was the beginning of his creative career, a path that, although it seemed difficult, was full of hope and opportunity. He felt that it was the first step towards the great world of music, towards what he had always wanted, to become a composer, to create music that touched people's hearts and minds. 19 years old. A dream come true at the age of 19, a dream that seemed a distant and difficult achievement became a reality. He entered a music college to study piano. It was an important milestone, the beginning of a real musical life. Confirmation of his place among future musicians was proof that he was on the right track. From the very first days of his studies, he realized that everything that was happening around him was not just learning, it was a real process of transformation. His first mentor, the wise and experienced pianist Yuri Yakovlevich Zilintsov, became not only his teacher, but also a guide in this new world. Zilintsov was not only a skillful pianist, but also a man who understood the student's soul. His teaching methods were deep and thoughtful, and he knew how to combine classical approaches with the emotional study of music. These first lessons were not easy, but they gave him the key to understanding the instrument itself, to the depth of music. His studies were intense, but also exciting. The first 2 years passed quickly and, it seems, even effortlessly. He tried to give himself completely to the music, and it paid off. His grades were high, almost perfect, and the feeling that he was doing well gave him confidence. He realized that every day he was getting closer to his destiny. But it wasn't just his success on the piano that made him happy. The learning process itself gave him new horizons. Improving his playing technique, studying great composers, understanding musical forms, all this filled his soul with a sense of harmony. With each new piece he learned, he felt not only his technique developing, but also his inner perception of music. These 2 years became the basis for his further creative growth. Music became his world, and piano became his language. It was the time when his dreams began to take shape, and the path to composing seemed not so far away. 20 years old. Searching for a new world at the age of 20, the first signs of mental complications began to appear. It seemed that the years full of study and creativity were approaching the stage of maturity, but the inner world began to crack. His student years, although filled with success, became for him not only a path to achieving his dream, but also a time of first difficult reflections and internal conflicts. Creativity, which had previously brought him peace and inspiration, began to be perceived as a source of stress and tension. Studying, relationships with other students and teachers, searching for his own identity, all this began to raise questions to which he could not find answers. Then, in search of understanding and harmony, he turned to psychedelic substances. His first experience with LSD was an attempt to understand reality from a different perspective, to choose new ways to understand the world and himself. He used LSD once a month, hoping that it would help relieve tension and find a new sense of life. During the first year, everything went well. He felt his cognition of sounds gaining momentum, his hearing and perception beginning to change, expanding, opening up new horizons for music and creativity. It was like a kind of explosion of emotions and ideas that he hadn't been able to grasp before. Listening to music became a special experience. It sounded like never before. His instrument seemed alive, and the notes were like invisible forces that could be felt with every breath. But over time, he began to notice that these moments of liberation from reality were becoming increasingly unpredictable. The duration of these emotional outbursts began to decrease, and subsequent attempts to find this fullness became less and less satisfactory. Subconsciously, he felt that these attempts to escape from reality could become a trap that could lead to deeper difficulties than those he was trying to escape. This was the first wake-up call that his attempts to find harmony through psychedelic experiences could lead to even more inner torment. Nevertheless, this first year with LSD was not a disaster for him. He felt uplifted, creatively exploded, but also became increasingly aware of the potential dangers that could come with such experimentation. Over time, he realized that true cognition of oneself and one's inner world must take place without escape, without external stimuli, through deep inner experience, meditation, and creative expression. 21 years old. Cracks in reality. At the age of 21, life seemed to be entering a new phase. My relationship with my father was improving. He became wiser, as if in maturity he had found the path to harmony. He began to listen to my advice, tried to abstain from alcohol and drugs, which was an important milestone in our communication. These were the years when I think he began to realize the importance of what I was doing and tried to support me. But with the outbreak of the war with Russia in 2014, his soul, wounded at the front, could no longer remain unchanged. He went through hell, where he saw the horrors of war, losses, blood and pain. These pictures left a deep scar on his psyche, and although he tried to return to normal life, his inner wounds did not allow him to calm down. He broke down again, started drinking, as if trying to drown out the pain of what he had experienced. Then another critical moment happened. My intuition, as always, told me that something was wrong with him. I felt that he was no longer among us. I picked up the phone and called my mom, but they lived separately and she didn't know where he was. After 2 days of searching, I went to the police. At that moment, I was ready for the worst, and it was confirmed. He was found dead, drowned in the water. His body was already severely mutilated. He had been in the water for a long time, and he looked completely different from how I remembered him. He was 44 at the time of his death, still very young. The funeral did not follow any traditions. The body was so deformed and swollen that they had to cut it open to fit it in the coffin. I was not able to see my father for the last time. It was an incredibly heavy shock that became unbearably difficult for me to bear. With this pain, I became depressed. Months seemed foggy, and even my closest friends could not understand what was going on inside me. The world around me seemed empty, not real. No matter how hard I tried to come to my senses, the pain and grief of the loss would not let me go. In addition, against the backdrop of these difficult experiences, COVID-19 began. It brought with it even more stress and uncertainty. Studying became remote, and I felt like I was losing control. Instead of improving my results, I went down to worse levels, and my condition began to deteriorate significantly. At the end of my second year, I was even on the verge of dropping out. All my efforts were gone, as if in weightlessness, and I realized that in order not to lose myself, I needed to pick myself up and start again. 22 years old. Shadows of war. At the age of 22, depression still had me in its grip. The pain of losing my father did not subside, and it seemed that every new day was just a struggle to feel alive again. My studies improved, but despite this, the inner vacuum remained. I kept moving forward, but I felt lost, as if I were not in my body. All these months I tried to find my way back to myself, keeping a balance between reality and my inner impulses. And then, at the beginning of this year, something happened that changed everything. The Great War, which I had only heard about and was afraid of, became a reality. On February 24, at 4 in the morning, I was on the night shift with my girlfriend. We both couldn't sleep when we suddenly heard the first explosions. At first, we thought it was a distant thunderstorm, but we quickly realized that it was not a thunderstorm, but the beginning of a bombing. Russia had invaded the territory of Ukraine. That morning, the world changed. The silence of the night was broken by the sounds of explosions coming from all sides. Our hearts were clenched with fear because we did not know what would happen next. At that moment, all my internal experiences, pain and depression seemed secondary. The war brought with it not only fear but also unpredictability. I realized that it was no longer possible to hide from reality. We were in the center of this chaos, and now we had to think only about how to survive. Even then I began to feel powerless. I could not escape from this reality even if I wanted to. The war invaded every corner of our lives. I couldn't get rid of the fear and anxiety I felt, but at the same time I felt a deep desire to act, to help those around me, and to do everything in my power to survive it together. This moment was a turning point in my life, as there was no room for the old internal pain or depression. The real, global struggle required a different kind of strength that I had to find within myself. 23 years old. On the brink, the 23rd year of my life was the year when it seemed that everything I had achieved began to melt away like snow in the warm sun. Graduating from the College of Art was another difficult stage for me. I felt exhausted, as if I had no strength left to fight. It was a time when my life seemed like a series of automatic movements. Exams, preparations, deadlines, worries, everything became a burden. My attempts to finish college were filled with an inner emptiness. I was forced to rely on my stubbornness and, yes, on the help of substances to keep me going. Their influence on my mind was not only a tool to fight fatigue, but also a way out of the dead end I found myself in. But even this could not hide how exhausted I was. I felt like I had no more strength, and I only had enough energy to get through it, but not more. The training was a bit of a stretch. I wasn't happy with the result, but at that moment it didn't matter. The main thing was that I did not give up. I did not allow myself to stop. And although I could barely make it through these last steps, it was this stubbornness that helped me pass the exams and still get my diploma. My condition was only getting worse. I felt broken and hesitated whether to go on to the College of Culture and Arts. Do I have the strength to do it? Would I be able to find at least a little more motivation? Back then, my friends Vlad, Arthur, Donya and Victor supported me, and my mentor, Alexander Shinsky, was the one who put me back on the right track. He was persistent, believed in me even when I had already lost faith in myself. Thanks to his support, I entered the academy, although I doubted in my heart whether I had done the right thing. At that time, the war was gaining momentum. It was getting closer, and a new wave of shelling and aerial bombardment began. My girlfriend and I repeatedly came under fire. Every day brought new challenges, and the feeling of danger became a constant companion. We hid in the basements, trying not to think about what could happen at any moment. This year was hard, but it became another mile marker. I realized that life is not only about striving for a certain goal, but also about the ability to survive in conditions that seem unbelievable. This year was a test not only for me, but for everyone around me. And although the war made me look at the world with different eyes, it also gave me the strength to go on, even when it seemed like I had no more strength. 24 years old. Isolation and struggle for survival. The spring of 24 brought me not only changes in my life, but also a complete break with reality. I was still working at the gas station, but I no longer felt like a part of this world. Everyone around me was immersed in the struggle for survival, and even at work I began to realize that not only normalcy but also humanity itself seemed to be lost. Every day was an echo of the war that was raging not only at the front lines but also in the heart of our country. The government I saw was looking more and more like a predatory animal. Corruption, violence, kidnappings, it had become commonplace. There were fewer and fewer men, they either went to the front or went missing. My country was on the brink, and human lives were becoming cheaper than ever. The streets became dangerous places where people simply disappeared into the night. I saw it with my own eyes, kidnappings, beatings, violence at every turn. All these terrible things no longer seemed like an anomaly, but became part of everyday life. Until then, I tried to preserve my humanity, continuing to work and create, finding the strength to make music and study science. But such a cruel reality made me think. I can't remain a part of this system, I can't take any risks. If I stay in this world, I might become the next victim. I was haunted by a sense of constant danger, so I made a difficult but necessary decision. To isolate myself. I locked myself in my house to protect myself from what was happening around me. It was not only a matter of physical safety, but also of psychological balance. I could no longer afford to be involved in a system that seemed to have no dignity or compassion anymore. I turned again to music, to science, to creativity as the only way to preserve at least some part of myself. It was my escape, my inner defense, in which I found strength. And although I was isolated, the feeling that you still can't ignore the fact that chaos is boiling around you was constant. But in the end, I found the strength not to lose touch with what was important. Music and science became the things that helped me to get through this difficult stage and not be swallowed up by a soulless machine. Section 2, Way to Olympus. The path to Olympus. The darkness of the night embraced him like an old enemy that appears only when the heart is bare. The boy was sitting in a cramped room where all the sounds echoed with hundreds of emotions. Despair, fear, despair. His father's voice tore through the space with screams that cut deep into his consciousness, leaving marks on his body like deep scars. He tried to run away with his thoughts, to hide behind the melody that sounded somewhere far away in his heart, but the sounds of the voices absorbed everything, leaving him alone with the feeling of his own insignificance. At that moment, he swore to himself that one day he would leave this room, this world of shadows, and find the strength to fight, even if it was the hardest path in his life. Only the melody became his lifeline in the darkest hours. When he closed his eyes, he would imagine sounds he had never heard before, melodies that appeared out of nowhere, as if someone were whispering them in his ear. These musical glimpses were his only hope, a thin thread that he held on to when life within the dark walls seemed unbearable. He couldn't explain where these melodies came from or why they were his only solace. He just knew that there was something more in each note, something real, something he missed so much in a world where everything seemed grey and unwelcoming. Out of this was born a desire, a dream that he believed would one day lead him to Olympus, where he would be able to free himself from pain and find his true self. A dark room with little to remind us of the happiness or carefree nature of childhood. A small boy sits in the corner, leaning against the wall. His heart trembles with fear as the voices outside the door grow louder and his father's shadow on the wall threatens to block out the world. From the very first years of his life, he learned what pain is and what the power of silence is. Dreams and music became his saving islands. A melody lived in him, despite all the words and actions that sought to break him. And on those long nights when he tried to sleep to the sound of screams, his imagination created fantastic compositions that came to life in his childhood heart. When he turned 10, he moved to a new city, but old fears and painful memories followed him like a shadow that could not be left behind. A new city meant new chances, but also new challenges. He didn't know that the first steps toward realizing his dream were ahead of him. In the dormitory of the medical college he entered at 15, he began to feel independent. It was here, in the silence and loneliness of the room at night, that he first started writing music and poetry. The first compositions are simple, naive, but sincere. They contain his experiences and deeply hidden dreams. Adolescence turns into a whirlwind of feelings, desperate impulses, and an unbearable need to be heard. It was then, at 17, that he met his first love. She becomes a muse who inspires his poems and songs. Their nightly bike rides become a separate melody that gives him a sense of freedom and flight. On the threshold of adulthood, he sets himself a goal: to enter a music college where he can develop his talent. He turns 18 and prepares for admission by working on himself day and night. He feels that he is on the verge of something bigger, although the fears of his childhood still come back to haunt him from time to time. When his dream finally comes true, he enters the Kharkiv College of Arts. Here his talent begins to manifest itself even more clearly, but at the same time a new burden appears in his life, the first manifestations of a mental disorder. At the age of 20, he begins to experience disturbing signs of depression. At the age of 21, he suffers a deep depressive episode that tries to destroy his aspirations and his spirit. His struggle only intensifies. At the age of 22, his condition worsens, and doctors diagnose him with bipolar disorder. Soon after, when he turns 23, it progresses to schizophrenia. Everyone would seem to recognize him as a defeated man, but he doesn't give up. In music, he finds one last opportunity to express himself. After graduating from the College of Arts, he enters the Academy of Culture. Now, at the age of 24, his compositions sound in a new way. They become deep, piercing, powerful. Every pain, every fall, and every victory resonates in them. These compositions can no longer be separated from his life, they become his life. The Path to Discovery. I was born on February 4, 2000, when the morning air was pierced with icy cold and snow covered the ground like a white blanket hiding all the secrets of the world. My birth took place in the silence of a cold morning, and this cold has remained my constant companion since then, a symbol of strength and struggle. I was born in the heart of a winter morning when everything around me seemed frozen, as if life itself had decided to pause. It was February, the 4th day of the month, somewhere around 4 in the morning, when winter held the city of Starobilsk in its icy embrace. The frost froze everything around me, and the silence was so thick that it seemed as if time had stopped for a moment, as if the world was holding its breath, waiting for my first breath. the cemetery near the house until I was 9 years old. We lived in Novo Adar, not far from the old cemetery, which my brothers and I called the park. Despite its purpose, this area was extremely beautiful. Trees, bushes, and flowers bloomed so profusely that the place looked more like a cozy grove than a place for eternal rest. Near our vegetable garden, there was a forest belt that became my personal refuge and a place where I learned to listen to myself and the world around me. It was here, among the trees and homemade shelters, that I first learned what freedom was. I built shelters, dug trenches and dugouts, and sculpted stoves out of clay and found bricks. In the winter evenings, when everything around me was freezing, I would warm myself by my small fire and think about my own fate. I thought about what it would be like to be on the edge, because since I was a little boy I had felt more than once how thin the line between life and death could be. Remember when I was 3 years old, I almost died. I fell into a deep river, and although the coldness of the water should have pierced me with fear, I felt only peace and harmony enveloping me, as if the universe itself was breathing next to me. Mike Zinasasha rescued me, but this event stayed with me, reminding me that even in the abyss you can find peace if you learn to listen to the world. It was then that I learned to look at my father with understanding. He was very young when I was born, only 21 years old. He didn't always know how to deal with a child, and in many ways he was left alone with his own demons. Alcohol, instability, drugs, all of this was eating away at him, but I could see in his eyes the struggle, the attempt to be the father I needed. I held on to his good moments, even though they were few. Fishing, rare moments of calm when everything seemed to be okay. And although my memories are often full of images of his threats, aggression, and psychological breakdowns, I always found the strength to forgive. I remember sitting together on the shore, casting our fishing rods, and the silence between us seemed much deeper and more honest than any words. Those were the moments when I knew that he was still fighting inside, and that's why I respected him, even when it was hard. If you look at my childhood, it was like a picture painted in different seasons. The first one was spring. When the snow melted and the earth began to revive after the cold winter, I, like all children, was eager for discovery. I spent a lot of time in the forest belt near our yard, where I dug trenches and dug the ground, believing that maybe there I would find answers to my questions about life. I believed then that if you dig deeper, you can get to the very center of the earth, to its secrets. And one day, after weeks of digging, I reached the water. I returned home excitedly, telling people about my discovery, as if I had found something important, something great. Summer was my time for big ideas. The summer was warm and rich in opportunities for fantasy and creativity. This season I became Noah again. I put on a white robe with a hood, wove a headband from tree branches and tied a belt of willow. Imagining myself as an old prophet who would save the world from disaster, I created shelters in the forest around our yard. I dug and built ovens, sculpted them out of clay, trying to realize my vision on earth. I was not just looking for answers to questions about nature, I was looking for answers to questions about my place in this world. When autumn covered the land with cold rains and the first snow began to appear on the horizon, I felt that it was time to move on. It was a time of transformation. I broke a branch from a thorny rose bush and brought it to my place, to the hut that became my fortress. At that moment, I felt inner pain, both physical and mental. I would take off my shirt and start beating myself with thorny branches on my back. It was like a purification, a cleansing of all unnecessary things, of fears and doubts. I was beating myself as if I was experiencing loneliness and pain for the first time, and I was trying to feel what it means to be strong, to withstand all difficulties. It was my own ritual test, my way of feeling that I was capable of dealing with anything. And although these moments of pain seemed strange, even scary, I had no regrets. They were part of my journey, my inner struggle, through which I moved from one season to another, from one stage of life to another. And each season brought me new opportunities for self-expression, for finding answers. They not only helped me to understand the world around me, but also to know myself. A land between worlds. At the age of 9, we moved again, but this time I was leaving not just home, but my fortress among the trees. The forest belt behind our garden was my whole world, a place where I learned about life, felt my first taste of freedom, holding a stick that served as a sword in my childhood wars, or just watching the evening sun disappear behind the tree crowns. Every pebble, every hole, every smell of the earth seemed to be part of something more important than just a child's game. It was a place where I felt that I could see more than just the everyday life of ordinary people. This forest belt behind the city had a special rhythm. Birds would fly up to the horizon in the evening, and in winter the trees would make a crackling sound in the cold, as if the whole forest was telling old fairy tales. I played in my own stories, where everything was on the verge of real and fictional. At those moments, I felt like a real architect of my dreams, and the forest belt was a place where every tree root and every leaf spoke to me in a language that only I could understand. Living near the cemetery was unusual. My brothers and I treated it with respect, but also as something mysterious. The cemetery, which everyone called a park, was both scary and attractive. There was a kind of quiet harmony in it, as if those who rested there were guarding our world and at the same time not preventing us from playing between the graves and bushes. Those places became silent witnesses to my first discoveries, my first experiences, and my thoughts that life is more than just childhood games. My father, though tainted by his own mistakes, remained a mystery to me. He would disappear into the darkness of his own fears, then suddenly become close, inviting me to go fishing or just sitting silently by my side. His threats, psychoses, and outbursts of aggression that frightened me as a child gradually became just a part of my world, not its central axis. At times, I felt that he was also stuck somewhere between worlds, between the reality where he was trying to be a father and the darkness that was pulling him further and further away. I remember how one day he raised his hand against himself, threatening to disappear from our lives forever. My mother, though hardy, could not hold back her tears, and I stood by her side, realizing that I understood my father more than I had ever thought. In those moments, I saw in his eyes something similar to what I saw in my own reflection. An inner struggle, a longing for peace and simplicity that it seemed he would never achieve. There, in these mixed worlds of childhood fantasies and adult realities, I learned to find peace even in the most dangerous moments. It was my world, intertwined with the eternal winter, the forest and the cemetery, with the laughter of my brothers and the invisible shadows of my parents' decisions. And whenever life became unbearable, I remembered the cold calm of the winter morning of my birth, the moment when time stopped and, for a moment, everything was quiet, clear, without fear. I was often impressed by biblical stories that intertwined with a child's imagination and perception of the world. The images of the heroes, in particular Noah and Christ, fascinated me not only because of their greatness but also because of the sacrifice they made. I wanted to feel what they felt, to understand why they chose their difficult paths. In my childish naivete, I once took my father's old clothes, pulled them on like a chlamydia, and imagined that I was Noah on a mission. I made staffs of long sticks with my own hands, raised them up, as if I were going against the elements. I spoke words that I did not even fully understand, but which seemed to me weighty and strong, as if they could withstand the whole world. Another time, fascinated by the story of Christ, I even built a wooden cross. It turned out to be rough and uneven, made of boards that I managed to find. At the time, it seemed to me that only by going through such trials would I be able to understand more about life and the pain that others go through. I tried to hang on it, throwing my arms out, naively imagining myself in the image that in my childhood imagination embodied strength and indestructibility. It was more than just a game. In those moments, exhausting myself, it was as if I was trying to understand what it meant to be strong in my weakness, what it meant to sacrifice. And although I was a child who was just looking for answers, in these naive games I was trying to understand what the world demanded of me and what I could give back when I grew up. Fascinated by the image of Noah, I put on a white robe with a hood reminiscent of the ancient garments of the prophets, and created a headband and a belt from fresh willow branches. I was attracted to this symbolism. The hood created a feeling of shelter, silence and chosenness, and the willow headband was like a wreath that connected me to nature, to the world of trees, plants and all living things that were nearby. Each element of this outfit had a special meaning, even if I did not fully understand it myself. It was something of my own, my unique, as part of a rite that I invented myself, a rite in which I took the place of ancient heroes, feeling both their power and their loneliness in the face of the big world. My childhood dreams and aspirations were embodied in these simple objects, filled with a deep, almost ritualistic meaning, and allowed me to feel my kinship with those who lived thousands of years ago, resisting the elements and fighting for their beliefs. This image of Noah, or perhaps some mysterious hermit, resonated with me, making me realize that there was more inside than just a boy, that year after year, the changing seasons brought me new discoveries, and the place near the old cemetery and the forest belt gave me a unique sense of life that lived its own rhythms. The winters here were harsh and quiet. It seemed that nature was sleeping in the shackles of ice, leaving only footsteps in the snow as the only evidence of movement. It was a silence in which I could think. During these cold winter months, wrapped in my white hooded robe and wrapped around myself with a willow belt, I imagined myself not just a boy, but someone like Noah, courageously accepting his fate in the face of universal silence. When a warm spring morning came, everything around me came to life. The trees began to turn green, filling the space with the scent of freshness. These springs became a symbol of rebirth for me. I would run to the forest belt, build shelters and small stoves out of dug clay, feeling like a creator in a world where every day brought new colors. Spring mornings filled me with vitality, gave me new strength, and the sounds of nature around me were perceived as part of a majestic symphony. In the summer, when the sun was high, I spent my days among the trees and bushes, exploring every clearing, every secret nook and cranny in the forest belt, which was both a shelter and a place of inspiration for me. On the hottest days, I sought coolness in the shade of the trees, creating small dugouts where I could hide as if under my own sky. Summer was a time of freedom for me, boundless freedom, when nothing limited me except my own idea of this world. Autumn changed this picture, adding new colors to it. The yellowed leaves underfoot, the soft but cool wind made the forest belt even more mysterious. Then I chose a different image for myself, approaching the image of Christ, pulling on my hood and weaving a rim of branches like a wreath. Once, having built a cross from boards, I tried to hang on it, spreading my arms, imagining what it would be like to be the embodiment of humility and suffering. It was my own special, childlike form of prayer on these autumn days when I felt that something bigger than me was encompassing this space. Winter was coming back, covering the ground with a white blanket, and once again gave me silence. Every time the cold covered the world, I felt like I was returning to the beginning, to the moment I was born. And in each of these cycles, in each change of seasons, I felt part of a greater rhythm of unity with nature, with the images that inspired me, and with the childhood dreams that germinated in me like seeds. In the woods near the forest belt, I dug as deep as my strength allowed, believing that I would reach the magma and open the deeper layers of the world. From the clay I dug up, I molded bricks for the stove that stood in the hut, a real chimney structure with a chimney that rose upward, releasing the aroma of grass and smoke. In the summer, my little hut became a refuge, where I sat with confidence, as if feeling connected to the very beginning of the world. In winter, everything changed. My hut with the stove turned into a place of comfort in the middle of the cold space. The fire warmed me, and I brewed herbal teas from the berries I picked in summer and fall. Each sip was a warm greeting from the sunny days that had passed. Here, in the coziness of the snow, I dreamed, watching the steam from the tea rise into the cold air. It was my childhood ceremony that gave me a real taste of winter. In the spring, when the ground became soft again, I would go to the forest belt near the garden and the cemetery. Here I would dig trenches around my hideout, fortifying it for future defenses. I built the trenches with inspiration, creating an oven inside the shelter and trying to get underground as deep as possible. One day I dug a tunnel 5 meters down, reaching groundwater. Excited by my discovery, I ran home telling my family how I found water underground. It was one of those victories that seemed like the greatest of my childhood, and gave me a sense of power, as if I had touched something real, deep, and waiting for me to find it. Over the years, these moments of seasonal change, the transition from winter cold to summer heat, became separate journeys for me, where I learned to understand myself and the world around me, each time discovering new secrets hidden underground, in herbs or in the smoke of the stove. And although the world around me was burning, I learned to find peace and quiet even in the most difficult times. Life has taught me to hold on to bright memories, to take lessons from the elements of nature, and to appreciate the experience of every family member, regardless of their path or age. The connection with loved ones is the strongest root that needs to be nurtured without resentment for the past, because it is in unity and support that we find our true strength and freedom. And I am grateful to everyone I have met along the way, because every moment, every person, and every event is a lesson that leads me further, shapes me, and strengthens me. Each chapter of life leaves its mark, teaches me to accept both joy and pain, to honor the power of silence and harmony in nature and in myself, and to open myself to the future with gratitude.
The end.